Well, I'm here to talk about one of the oldest fashioned of prophecy subjects. Entirely appropriate, therefore, that it should be an old-fashioned speaker using what must be the last of the overhead projectors in North America, from what I hear about PowerPoint presentations. So forgive me, it's the way I was brought up, and it'll be the last time I think we talk about this subject. Let's hope it is, because let's hope the Lord will return. I say an old-fashioned subject because if you look back through the magazines, you will notice that right in the earliest days of our community, Brother Thomas, Brother Roberts were spending a lot of time concerned with the role of Britain in, as they saw it then, assisting the Jews to return to the land. Now, it may be old-fashioned, and a lot of people therefore have perhaps come to regard it as such, perhaps even indeed obsolete. After all, Britain no longer has an empire. Well, so what? Britain no longer has the largest maritime fleet on the face of the earth. Well, so what? We're no longer mining tin in Cornwall. Well, so does that make it an obsolete subject? And Britain seems to be more concerned with Europe than it does with an erstwhile empire. And the trouble is, when you approach Bible prophecy from the angle of geopolitics, economics, world affairs, rather than approaching it from the understanding of God's purpose with Israel, the hope of which is ours, brothers and sisters, yours. And therefore it's not have evolved ago. When I was asked to deal with this subject at a Coventry or UK prophecy day, I spent a good 6 or 9 months going back, trawling through every possible magazine I could get hold of, going back, to the Apostolic Advocate even, Herald of the Kingdom. I went through the Logos, the Testimony, the Christadelphian, the Advocate, the Tidings, you name it, and just others. And I was amazed at what I found as being the understanding of who Tarshish was. Here's a few examples. And hope you can see that. I came to the conclusion that Tarshish must be the victim of a lot of unscriptural speculation. How could we arrive at the conclusion that NATO might be Tarshish? There were those who were trying to say that, well, if you understand it correctly, Tarshish in its geographical context would be Syria, or it could be Tunisia, alias Carthage, the successor to the marketplace of Tyre, so that wasn't too bad a suggestion. Or of course it could be all nations, but then if you're good on Chaldean language, and I'm not, you would know that Tarshish is the word for big ships, any old ships, all nations. So brothers and sisters, when you look through what in the last 100 years across the Christadelphian world have been some of the suggestions, you can understand why people end up being a little bit confused, perplexed, even suggesting that Israel was Tarshish. So I want to suggest to you that the reason why we end up in this position is because we fail to relate prophecy, the prophetic word, to our fundamental doctrines. Now, I don't know, I haven't heard it in North America once or twice, and I shouldn't tell tales out of school, but in the UK you hear a rather strange statement made. So long as we can agree on doctrine, Brother John, it doesn't really matter what we think about prophecy. Well, think about it for one moment, and that's a terribly dangerous and rather foolish thing to say. Does it matter? And what I want to do this morning is approach this subject not from the root of geopolitics, if you like, or world affairs, but from our belief in the hope of Israel. You see, brothers and sisters, if you look at our statement of faith, it doesn't matter whether it's amended or unamended, you'll notice that there are 17 proof clauses taken from Daniel and Revelation. Now look, if you and I can't agree on how we should understand Revelation and Daniel, what on earth are we doing insisting that a statement of faith shall be the only basis for admitting members to our community? So if we don't agree on Revelation and Daniel, why do we include them in our statement of faith as one of the proofs of the divine nature and origin, the inspiration of the Word of God? So we should therefore, when looking at prophetic subjects, bear in mind what the fundamental purpose of God is with his people and through his people with us. Now, of course, all of this is not helped, one has to admit, by a sort of preoccupation with 19th century British imperialism. That usually happens, and then I get a complaint from the guys on the video that I keep moving about. Sorry about that, Tim. But it's a preoccupation which you will find with the great British Empire. Well, it was natural, I suppose, in the 1800s and 1900s. But then at the other extreme, you have what I would call the 20th century passion for revisionism. Any new idea, because we've got to use our own minds, haven't we? And we've got to think it through for ourselves. And so you come up with some of those ideas. Now, what I want to do then this morning is go back to that hymn we've just sung. Do you remember that third verse? The Gentiles shall her glory see, and kings declare her fame. Appointed unto her shall be a new and holy name. That, to my mind, is the core of our hope, that we look forward to the time when, for Zion's sake, the Jews will return to the land, the people of Judah now, and eventually after the return of Christ, of course, the remainder of Israel. So let's then approach the subject from that angle and say to ourselves, where do you read about that? Where do you read the scriptural justification for that third verse? You've got to go to Deuteronomy, and I'm just going to run through what I think are the key scriptures on this subject. What do we read in Deuteronomy 30? The Lord thy God will have compassion upon thee, a little bit difficult with the reflection here, and will gather thee from all nations, whither the Lord hath scattered thee. And you go on, if any of thine be driven out unto the utmost parts of heaven from thence, will the Lord thy God gather thee from thence. Now, you may say there's a reference in Deuteronomy 4 to the scattering. Yes, that's true. But the first reference I can find to the regathering of the people is there in Deuteronomy. So this is the basis of that hymn, verse 3, that we've sung. Now, let's go a little further. The Lord has said way back in Deuteronomy that he is going to gather his people, that the Gentiles will see his glory. And so Jeremiah reminds us that they are to be gathered from the uttermost part of the earth. Jeremiah 32 says, I will gather them out of all countries. He's not talking about regathering them from Babylon, or from Assyria, or from Moab, or Egypt, or wherever. He is saying, I will bring them again unto this place out of all countries. A message that Ezekiel rams home when he says, again, I will gather you out of all countries. Isaiah takes up this same theme. Let's take Isaiah 43 first. I will bring thee from the east, will gather thee from the west. I will say unto the north, give up, and to the south, keep not back. North, south, east, and west. Bring my sons from far, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. So, brothers and sisters, it's very clear that the regathering of his people, be they Judah or Israel, will come from the ends of the earth, from all countries. So we have to remind ourselves then that Israel, the Jews, let's call it, are indeed spread worldwide. Now that's a map taken from Martin Gilbert's atlas, many of you have seen it, which emphasises, and I show just for one reason, to emphasise that the Jews are spread worldwide, be it in Fiji, in New Zealand, in Hong Kong, in Argentina. But I don't know if you heard the news, I think it was a couple of months ago, when from Jerusalem it was announced that there are now more Jews back in the land than there are in diaspora, which is something. You could not have said that at a prophecy day 15 years ago. This is a dramatic witness, is it not, to the signs of the times. And so we emphasise that God has said, I will save you from all countries. Now that's a fundamental doctrine that we believe in, that we are looking for the regathering of the Jews. Now Jeremiah has a problem. He says, wait a minute, how is it going to happen? And so he says in Jeremiah 3, but I said to the Lord, how shall I put thee among the children, and give thee a pleasant land and a goodly heritage of the host of nations? How's it going to happen, Lord? Jeremiah, as we've seen Isaiah, Ezekiel, say that it is from the ends of the earth that I will gather my people together. Well, that's all right if it was just across the river or desert in Babylon or Assyria or even just down in Egypt. I could understand that. But how is it going to happen? And so if you turn to Jeremiah 31, you have the most markable, not just remarkable, the most markable verse, I believe, on this subject. If you go there and just study what it says, and I don't know if you use those highlighter pens, but mine has long since been marked up with that verse. Jeremiah says, now hear the word of the Lord. Well, who's got to hear the word of the Lord? Judah and Israel? No. Hear the word of the Lord, O ye goyim, you heathen, you nations, you Gentiles. So you Gentiles had better hear the word of the Lord, and here's what you've got to do with it. You've got to declare it in the isles afar off. And this is what you've got to say. He that scattered them will bring them back again. So here is an obligation then, brothers and sisters, placed upon not the Jewish priests, but upon the Gentile nations to bring the message worldwide. Jeremiah wasn't the only one who had a problem on how's it going to happen. It's all right saying that I will do it, yes Lord, but how are you going to do it? Isaiah repeats the thought. Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken, ye people from far. Now the Lord is addressing people from far. He's addressing Gentiles, isn't he? Behold, I will lift up my hand to the Gentiles, and they shall bring thy sons in their arms. They'll bring their sons in their arms. They'll put their loving arms around my sons and daughters, and they will carry them upon their shoulders. So there's got to be some kind of Gentile nation that will gather my people in their arms and bring them back to the land. And then he goes on and says, well, the isles, what isles? The isles shall wait upon me, and upon mine arm shall they trust. Oh, that's interesting. So here is Isaiah saying that at the time of the regathering of my people, there shall arise a nation, a Gentile power, who will put their loving arms around my people, bring them back on their shoulders, and in my word and in me shall they trust. And when that happens, the redeemed of the Lord shall start to return. So we exercise our mind and say, well, what do you mean by isles and coastlands and so on? Well, Gesenius provides a very good clue. If you look up those words, you discover that the isles mean more than just a few offshore islands. Offshore islands of where? Israel? We will look at one offshore island of Israel this afternoon, but what are those offshore islands? Well, they really mean isles afar off, distant maritime lands. When you read the word coasts, when you go to Josenius, you realise that he's talking about extreme regions of the earth. He's not talking about the Levant or the coast around Tel Aviv or the Red Sea coast. So now we're building a picture that in God's prophetic purpose, a Gentile power is to arise that will put its loving arms around my people, carry them back on their shoulders because they trust in what I'm trying to do, and they will bring them from distant parts. So, let's sum up. What have we learnt from Scripture so far? Well, this latter-day Gentile power, because the Bible tells us it is Gentile, is afar off. It is of the isles, has many ships, is in the uttermost part of the earth, has powerful arms, will trust in God. But who is it? The Bible doesn't tell us. Well, Isaiah does give us a hint. In fact, Isaiah spells it out, but the interesting thing is that in that 60th chapter of Isaiah, you know, the one that begins, "Arise, shine, the light is come," after the return of Christ, it tells us that the isles, whoever they are, shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first will bring my sons from far. Hold on. We all know Isaiah 60 is to do with the time after the return of Christ. So this power, who is going to bring my people back from far, will still be doing it when Christ is in the earth. Well, that does complicate things, and unfortunately, brothers and sisters, the Bible doesn't tell us which power it is. There's no explicit nomination of a power, not just one chapter or even verse. Not even one prophet concerns itself solely with the subject. And it clearly, if it's going to be operative after the return of Christ and have something to do with the return of the Jews before Christ, it can't be a single state, stable power like Babylon came and went, and Assyria came and went, and so on, Medo-Persia, the ancient Greeks. This power was in existence before the return of Christ and was still operative afterwards. Now I'll tell you something. We have a audio cassette tape service in the UK for sending out exhortations to people in isolation and so on. There are 1,000 tapes listed in that catalogue. There are only 4 that have any attempt to deal with the subject of Tarshish. I find that quite amazing. Of the 4, I'm bound to say 2 of them are not, frankly, not very good. One of them sees Israel as being the power, and another one is still reveling in the 19th century. Now, I don't want to sound critical, but I just want to give an idea of how 1,000 tapes, the subject of Tarshish, so important to us as Brits and ex-Brits and expats and maybe a few Canadians and Americans too, is not even the subject of extensive study. Anyway, enough of that. What we have to do is remind ourselves how God uses nations. He used Assyria, Babylon, and Rome to disperse his people, like Deuteronomy chapter 4 suggests. But he uses Cyrus as the agent of his power to return his people back to the land. Now, whatever we may think about Cyrus, he was ecumenical in that he was tolerant of other religions. Cyrus, if you read Ezra, knew the name and purpose of the Almighty. He addresses God by that name, Yahweh, doesn't he? He, like Balaam, as we'll see this afternoon, at least recognized the existence of Yahweh. And so he was used, was he not, by God to return his people to the land. And so it is. Having seen the way the Lord works, we know that he uses those nations to influence the destiny of his people. All right, so we've been talking now for 20 minutes or whatever it is, and we still haven't tried to identify who Tarshish is. What we're trying to do is approach the subject from a doctrinal point of view. And so we're left with the big question of, who then is this power called by Isaiah as Tarshish? What does it say about its mission? Well, I think we've already seen half a dozen quotes, haven't we? This power that eventually in Isaiah 60 he refers to as Tarshish must be worldwide, must have loving arms towards Israel, must be prepared to carry Israel upon its shoulders, and trust in the power of God. So we're left with the question of, how then does it affect the return of the Jews, Judah, let's say, those in the land, and still after return of Christ, the return of Israel, the work of Elijah and so on? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that is not to turn to the business pages of the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times or the shipping gazettes or you name it. There's only one way to find out, and that is to go back and do, and it's a tedious job, brothers and sisters, one evening, make a printout from your computer of all the references to Tarshish, and you will find there are 27. There are, in fact, additional references to verses that refer to the Isles and so on, but we'll leave that out of it. Just stick with what it says about Tarshish. We will also omit all the 54 references made to Tyre, which is an allied subject but not ours today. Now, if you sit down solidly one evening or two evenings and go through and write out every verse and say, well, what is that verse telling me about Tarshish? You will end up with what I have called an 18-point identikit. Now, I don't know if that term means anything over here, does it? You know, when there's a robbery or something and the police want to interview a certain person, they sketch out the sort of characteristics of the man they're looking for, and it's called an identikit. Well, I've drawn up an identikit of this power Tarshish based solely upon Scripture. And if you look at it, brothers and sisters, it's quite dramatic. Let me run through those items on the screen. You start in Genesis. Genesis 10, it tells you it's a Japhetic power. Psalm 72, it's an island power. Jonah tells us wherever Tarshish was, it was a long way from Jaffa. He was trying to get away from the Lord, wasn't he? And he wouldn't just pop round the corner. He would be sailing to a far-off place. He would be getting there by boat, and it would be to the west. Come to think of it, he wouldn't get very far if he tried going by boat to the east, would he? So it was a maritime power. Ezekiel 27 tells you it's a trading nation. 2 Chronicles 9, Tarshish, whoever it is, it was global seafarers. Ezekiel 27, it was the unique source of 4 important metals. Ezekiel 38 tells you it's part of a family of lions. Isaiah 49, it was notably pro-Jewish. Isaiah 51, respected God. I put in brackets Protestant, come to that later. Ezekiel 38, it was allied to some Arabs. Ezekiel 38 again, able and willing to oppose Russia at Armageddon. Psalm 48, the bit that most speakers don't like having to deal with, Tarshish has to be humbled. And yet, as we've seen, Isaiah 60 has to be restored. Now, brothers and sisters, that is what Scripture tells us about Tarshish. So having found out then and established what the purpose is of Tarshish, what its role is, who can it be? What you have to do is, in all honesty, sit down and say, well, how does it fit some of the suggestions that have been made, which I showed you in the first place? Can't possibly be Russia. You wouldn't think, would you, that Germany was notably pro-Jewish? Has the United Nations been a worldwide seafaring power? And what about France or Italy? Has the Vatican been notably pro-Jewish? Of course it isn't. What about the European Union? Notably anti-Jewish at the moment. Tunisia, well, that's a good guess because that is Carthage, which is where the power of Tyre went to when Tyre collapsed in the sea. Spain, the land of the Inquisition that drove the Jews out and why Christopher Columbus came over this part of the world with a Jewish navigator. No, they just don't make any sense. And so why is it then, and you have to conclude, I believe, that when you look at those alternative suggestions, they are based on political, worldwide events rather than seeing the prophetic word in the doctrinal context. And so then, if we are to summarize those 27 verses, we'll isolate the key elements involved in the role of Tarshish. It's a moving target. Tarshish has a purpose and an objective. It's not like Assyria or Babylon or Medo-Persia rising and then passing off the scene. So stemming from our identikit, I think we have to say that the power of Tarshish, summarised under 4 main headings, all those 27 points, it's a Gentile family, well, we're told it's Gentile, of lion nations among distant isles and maritime lands. It's Bible respecting, pro-Jewish, has a Jewish orientation at the right time in God's plan, capable of taking God's word worldwide. Hear, O ye nations, and proclaim it afar off, Jeremiah 31, right? It has to be some kind of global trading power, traders in the marketplace of Tyre. We're not talking about the latter-day Tyre either. With strong interests in the Middle East, so strong that in the end it wants to defend them against aggression. So we say, all right, let's look at those 4 groups very briefly and ask yourself which group could be called a Gentile family of lion nations among distant isles and maritime parts. Well, it obviously isn't Russia, Germany, Italy, Spain. Sardinia was one, wasn't it? Carthage, Tunis, they don't fit. Well, does this group of nations fit? Remember what Isaiah said? The isles afar off shall wait upon me for the purpose of bringing my sons back from far, and you saw how far the sons were. And they would have a power to bring those sons back. Now, I know what you're going to say. John, that's the British Empire. Sorry, brothers and sisters, you cannot call it the British Empire. The term British Empire was abandoned in the year I was born, which was 1931. You cannot refer to that as the British Empire. It's an obsolete description. You say, well, British Commonwealth. No. You cannot refer to those nations as being the British Commonwealth because that title was dropped in 1946. So what are we to call it? Well, I'd like to suggest that there is a term which perhaps is good enough for our purpose, and it's not an original description of my part. It's one that traces its origin back some 100 years or so to Christadelphian writers. So there is a group of nations that does seem to conform to the description that we listed in that identikit. One of the writers in one of our leading newspapers, a guy called Simon Winchester, wrote a book called Outposts. Now, what was remarkable was what he was trying to do was say, the remarkable thing about this coagulation of English-speaking peoples is, if you can see it at the bottom, in addition to the major independent nations like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, there are 16 dependent territories stretching from Anguilla in the West Indies through to the Pitcairn Islands in the Pacific. And it's made up of 200 island communities with, 128,000 inhabitants who are British, spread from the West Indies through to the Pitcairn Islands. Now, could that description apply in any way to the Dutch, the Spanish, the Germans? No, it can't. Could it apply to the United Nations? You know. Israel? No, it can't. So we narrow things down and come to the conclusion that maybe all these old-fashioned photographs and cartoons which you've seen are not that wide of the mark. This is, of course, one of the recruiting posters from the First World War, indicating, as you can see, Canada, Australian, and what were then nations governed by the King of England. So it was in the First World War, when national service came into operation, if the King of England declared you had to join the army, that applied in places like Australia, certainly, and I think my brother over here could tell us more about what applied to Canada. But the point was, that was all abandoned in 1931, but still that group of nations existed. Next time you're in London and want to pop round to Buckingham Palace, have a look, see if the Queen is at home, and you can always tell that by if the flag is flying. And if you look at the flag, it is just coincidental, I suppose, that it carries since the time of Edward III in about 1200, this great symbol of the lion. Outside, on top of the gate post, is of course the rampant lion, as on the gates and all around Buckingham Palace. But that's just one of those, if you like, British imperialist touches from the 19th century. The fact that on the postage stamps of today we still incorporate them. Ah, you say, yes, but English-speaking peoples, well, what about the Americans? Well, what about them? Are they part of the lion group of nations? Yes. The United States, or America, was the first lion to leave home. If you go to San Francisco, you can walk down one of the tourist places there, you've probably done it, and you can see that great array of flags which show the way in which the Stars and Stripes has evolved through taking the Union flag with it. Oh, well, then it adopted something that looks like horribly like the European Union circle of stars, except there are 13 of those and only 12 in the book of Revelation, so it can't be that nation. Then you see the way the American flag has developed. I was driving through Paris yesterday with Brother Paul Billington and saw the Ontario flag, still with the flag of Britain. So, well, enough of all that. We have to pass on to remembering that whoever this nation is, and I hope you've still got an open mind, one thing we're told is that on my name, the isles shall wait upon the Lord, and upon me will they trust. So we're looking for a God-fearing, God-respecting, if not in fact God-believing nation. So we want to find then, what nation is it that could be called at least Bible-respecting or God-fearing? I can think of one. Because remember how Isaiah also used a passage we haven't looked at and says this power will be foster parents or guardians. What does Isaiah say? Kings shall be thy nursing fathers, queens thy nursing mothers. What a way to refer to the power which God has ordained shall bring his people back. And so Tarshish must be Bible-oriented. They must know what they're doing. And it does just so happen, in God's divine providence, that Wycliffe emerges in the 1300 and makes his stand against Rome. You know the stories of Tyndale. 1611, what you call the King James Version or the Authorized Version. It's this power, this island power afar off, that promotes that. In 1697, it was this power that promoted the Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge. And in 1804, founded the British and Foreign Bible Society. It all fits Scripture. On mine arm shall they trust. Well, nobody is pretending that the British people or the English-speaking peoples are necessarily have a full comprehension of the Declaration and the 32 points of the Statement of Faith. No, we're not suggesting that for one moment. But like Cyrus, and like, in a way, Balaam, they knew there was a God, and they knew he had a purpose with his people. And so it was that nation which led the Protestant Reformation. We'll come back to the coronation oath in a moment. But if you just consider one or two things, brothers and sisters, it is amazing how British leaders read their Bibles. Now, Oliver Cromwell probably doesn't mean much to you, but he was the Lord Protector of the Protestant Revolution, I suppose, the independence movement of the 17th century. And it was he who was approached by the Jews living in Amsterdam, and they said to him, Oliver, could we go back to the land? And you read how Oliver Cromwell was in favour of helping the Jews go back to a land occupied by the Turks, the Ottoman Empire. William Pitt was the youngest British Prime Minister, makes Tony Blair look positively old, and he was in power about 1800. 1800, yeah, well that's Napoleon, isn't it? No, brothers and sisters, to you and me, that's the time of Revelation 16 and the vials. And when William Pitt saw what was going on with Napoleon and saw how successful he was, he turned to the Archbishop and said, excuse me, is there anything in the Bible about this? To which the reply was, yes, it's in Revelation, it's in the vials. Now, if you read the story of William Pitt, you will see how he was struck by the amazing way Napoleon was rampaging across Europe. Lord Shaftesbury, one of our great social reformers, founded the Bible Society for the purpose of taking the Bible worldwide. Then there was Gladstone, 4 times Prime Minister of England, wrote that book, which couldn't bring with me, couldn't get in the luggage, The Impregnable Rock of Scripture. Now, brothers and sisters, could you imagine Maggie Thatcher, Tony Blair, or David Cameron, or anyone else writing even a leaflet on that subject, let alone a book that thick, proclaiming his faith in the impregnable rock of Scripture? You come to, well, we'll come back to Lord Balfour in a moment, but I think you also know that Churchill's driver during the war was a Christadelphian. Now, Lord Balfour is particularly interesting to us because it is said that even before he pronounced his declaration, he had on his desk in the Foreign Office a Bible. Oh, why? What was his upbringing? What was his background? Well, it's very interesting that in the UK, before the background that I was brought up in what was, well, I suppose then even called the Unamended or the Advocate Fellowship in England, we had a magazine which was called the Fraternal Visitor. And in the Fraternal Visitor for 1950, there occurs a letter from Brother Leese recalling the fact of how, when he was in Edinburgh, there was a brother and sister in the little village of Haddington outside Edinburgh, which was the home of the Balfour family. And how the brother Armstrong was the postmaster and his wife was a sort of professional nanny and what he called tutor to these old family buildings. And so it is highly likely that Sister Armstrong was the nanny to Balfour. Now, I recently was a bit sceptical, no doubt, like some of you might be. I recently undertook a research project, and lo and behold, from the 1850s and 1890s censuses, you discover that that brother was indeed postmaster at that village. And the other Sunday night, we had a man come into our meeting room, got talking to him afterwards, and lo and behold, he came from the Balfour estate. Now, that's all just by the way. It might, however, in God's plan, be a way of working through believers to influence the decisions of men. So many Protestant Bible readers, long before Christadelphians came along, saw that the Jews would return to Palestine, saw that after the drying up of the river Euphrates, there would be a re-establishment of the land. And furthermore, identified Britain as being the source of such help. So the third group then, very quickly, capable of taking God's word. Hear, O ye nations, and take the word of God worldwide. Now we're trying to identify who Tarshish is, not by political, economic, or world affairs, or guessing at game of nations, but what does the Bible say about what it has to do? It is a fact that when Britain decided to build its empire, the imperialists and the sailors and the military men went first. People like Drake, Hawkins, Raleigh, Captain Cook. I guess Hudson would be a name over here. But as soon as they went, then followed the missionaries. The Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge worldwide was formed, just a few years after the Pilgrims landed in America. The Young Men's Christian Association, promoted by Britain in 76 countries. On my name they shall trust. Kings shall be nursing fathers. Queens shall be nursing mothers to bring them back. And so those missionaries like James Carey, who went to India, Robert Chalmers to the Pacific Islands, David Livingstone to Africa, Robert Moffat to South Africa, taking the word of God worldwide. I am not pretending for one moment that they were taking Bible truth worldwide, but they were taking Bibles. And maybe it has been left to the Christadelphians in these last days to take Bible truth worldwide. And so then, when we look at the position and we see, I should have had a little more tact than put British Columbia flag on here. I should have put the Ontario flag, I guess. But did you know the first flag to fly over Hawaii, currently having problems with America, was a Union Jack? The first flag to fly over Fiji was the same, and over the Falkland Islands and South Africa and America and Australia and New Zealand. Take the word of the Lord worldwide. And so this power has to have that ability. Well, we'll pass on just to mention one little detail. You know, in Ezekiel 27, how it says, Tarshish was a merchant by reason of a multitude of all kind of riches, and it spells out silver, iron, tin, and lead. And of course, you know the story is they came over here to Cassiterides, the Tin Islands, that is Britain, to get those commodities. Now, what most people don't realise is, when Brother Paul and I were doing some research into this whole subject about 10 years ago, we went down there. We went to the Royal Geological Society of Great Britain, and we learned that Britain is the only place on the planet of the earth where, according to the British Geological Society, you will find not only those metals, but also gold. You know, the Princess Diana's wedding ring was made of British gold, and gold incidentally turns up in Isaiah 60, doesn't it? But there is no other place on the planet, so according to British authorities, that you will find not only those metals, but some 16 others. Well, it's quite remarkable. We won't tarry over that subject, but brothers and sisters, if you are interested in the evidence, then there's a booklet by Brother Paul and a video we tried to make some years ago. And so then, what about Britain and America? Where do the English people fit in? Well, you know that Britain has found its principal ally to be the United States. Well, that's not surprising. Maggie Thatcher had a good deal going with Reagan, didn't she? And John F. Kennedy with Harold Macmillan. But what is remarkable about the present situation is that we have a socialist prime minister whose ambition was to be at the heart of Europe. And you have an American president who wasn't too sure where Iraq was when he came to power, and certainly was concerned with American issues, not foreign affairs issues. And yet, if I may be guilty and plead guilty immediately to misapplication of Scripture, those words in Ezekiel 38 applicable to Russia really do seem to fit. This uneasy alliance between a Brit who wanted to be in Europe but can't be, an American who didn't want to be in the Middle East at all, but the Lord has said, I will put hooks in thy jaw, I will drag you into the Middle East, because you, the English-speaking people, have got a job to do protecting my people, the Jews. Forgive the misapplication of that quote. But it does seem like it. They were forced to go there. And let's see what happens in America on Tuesday, and let's see what happens to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Might it be, as we shall see in a moment, they'll be removed because of their desertion from the power that they once had. So don't let's escape the fact that we're in for trouble. There is trouble ahead for Tarshish, and this was the title of our talk in the UK Prophecy Day, because people like to look back and say, oh, well, of course, that was Britain's empire in the 19th century. Hang on. What we have to do is warn everyone, brethren and sisters particularly, that there is trouble ahead for us. Why? Have you never realized how many scriptures there are that point to the judgment coming upon those who were once, on thy name shall we trust, key fundamental doctrinal point. I will bless them that bless thee, I will curse him that curseth thee. But carry on. Proverbs, righteousness exalteth a nation, but a reproach, sin is a reproach to any people. You go on through those quotes in Jeremiah and Psalm 50. Now, consider this, lest you forget God, lest I tear you in pieces, because you have deserted me. And Psalm 9, the wicked shall be turned into hell. You know, you could add to that, there's a whole another page of quotes we could go to, showing what judgment will come upon those who've been prepared to benefit from God's blessing, as the English people have been, and yet turn their back on the Lord. And so then, trouble ahead for Tarshish, brothers and sisters? Yes, for 3 reasons at least. We showed you that in accordance with Scripture, this power, returning the Jews to the land, had to have some respect for the Word of God, and did have. Could be that Arthur James Balfour had a Christadelphian influence at work when he was a lad. Don't know, let's not speculate. But what we do know is, in the 19th and 20th century, there were those who respected the work of the Lord. It was in 1953, when the Queen was crowned, that she made the coronation oath. I will be a faithful Protestant, and I'll do everything I can to ensure that the Protestant throne is continued. Oh, come on, I don't know if Prince Charles and Camilla make news over here anymore, but he wants to be the defender of all faith, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs. Oh, Queenie has got a lot of work to do yet before the time has come for her to retire. When the Lord takes her, we don't know. But what we do know is that she, having made that solemn public vow, and she is head of a church where 81% of its bishops no longer believe the Bible, where 74% of the Anglican Church believe you can have a church without a Bible. We have a Prime Minister who, unlike Balfour and Lloyd George and Salisbury and Palmerston, one of the last acts of Yasser Arafat was to come and shake hands with Tony Blair, saying, okay, yeah, we'll support you, Yasser. We believe in a two-state approach. I don't know how much longer either Tony Blair or Mr. Olmert are going to last, but I do know it can't be very long. When you look at what happened to Ariel Sharon, Rabin, Peres, and the rest of them, honestly now, what's the average lifetime of an Israeli Prime Minister? But you see how Britain and America are now deserting their original role. Trouble ahead for Tarshish. Britain, well, you know, I think Rupert Murdoch, you know his newspapers, the English tabloids. In the time of Queen Elizabeth, 1588, we saw off the Spaniards when the Pope tried to invade Britain to keep it as a Roman Catholic country before the days of Henry VIII. And so Francis Drake and Queen Elizabeth I saw off the Spaniards. Nelson, Revelation 16, the Vials, saw off the French. 1940, Churchill saw off the Germans. Why? Well, it was not in accordance with God's plan to have the power which would help to create the return of the Jews and had the mandate at that time for Israel to be removed. But now it's Tony Blair, he doesn't care anymore. He's quite prepared to surrender Britain to Europe. But for how much longer? All we do know is that 2 years ago, he was one who supported or tried to support the creation of a European constitution. And that is going to have terrible effects, or could have terrible effects upon us. We always used to sing, Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves, and we've got to ask ourselves now whether Britannia will waive the rules for the benefit of Christadelphians. Just think of some of the things that we're going to be up against. Discrimination against sisters. Well, of course, you Christadelphians, your church managers do not allow women to be part of your church management, do you? No, absolutely correct. Ooh. Discrimination? Gay marriages in your hall? Look, we, the British government, allow you, Christadelphians, a tax rebate on any gifts you give to the church. You know, I think something like that happens over here, doesn't it? So if you give money to your ecclesia, you knock it off the amount of tax you have to pay. Well, that's a concession from the government. So do you mind, please, if you now recognise gay marriages? You've got a licence in your hall to hold marriages. You're going to discriminate against people? Subjects that you can give lectures about. Thou art the way by thee alone. You're quite wrong, because it's by Mahomet too. And there have been occasions in Britain where people seeking to proclaim Bible truth have come unstuck. Some lecture subjects to be banned. Now, we have some dreadful tabloid papers in England, and the other night over at Watford in North London, I gave a public lecture. Standard stuff, brothers and sisters, absolutely standard stuff, Daniel, Revelation, and all the rest of it. I heard that someone in the audience was a freelance journalist. And I went home that night and I had a bit of a nightmare, because I hoped he wasn't working for Rupert Murdoch's tabloid papers. Because if he were, I wonder whether this is how he would report us. Christadelphian vicar arrested for breach of the peace. That was me, of course. He calls Catholic Church a whore. Do you know he actually said that Jesus would kill the Pope and all mosques would be destroyed? And he called the European Union a beast. NATO forces were to be annihilated, and the NHS, National Health Service, would be replaced by miracle workers. Do you know something? That is a 100% absolutely accurate report of what I said. And that is exactly what the Bible teaches us, isn't it? But you see the way the world now is going to interpret that. Did you know that in England we have a incitement to religious hatred bill? Which if I had stood, as men have done, in Trafalgar Square in London and proclaimed those very things, I could be in prison next week. And there is an example of a Pole who was put in prison for 10 months because he called the Pope the Brezhnev of the Vatican. Brothers and sisters, we are facing trouble ahead for Tarshish. Scripture? Well, for the day of the Lord is upon us. Isaiah, chapter 2. The day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone, and upon everyone that is lifted up he shall be brought low, and upon the ships of Tarshish. And Psalm 48, the events of, lo, the kings were assembled together. They saw it, and they marvelled, and were troubled and hasted away. Fear took upon them, and the ships of Tarshish were broken. Why? Actually, the two or three good possibilities. Maybe it was the effect of the earthquake on Mount of Olives. It might be the effect of nations pouring into the Middle East. We don't know. But what we do know is there is trouble ahead for this nation. And we've tried to indicate the effect, possibly clipped, on the ecclesia. But it's not all doom and gloom. Somehow, brothers and sisters, and we know not how or when, there has to be, or Tarshish must undergo some form of humbling or change. Now, if we had more time and we were going to look at Isaiah 23 and deal with Tyre, I believe there is a clue there as to how and when that will come about. But so far as Tarshish is concerned, we're not told. I don't know. What I do know is something must happen to make the power of Tarshish come to its senses. Why? Well, what was the purpose and the role of Tarshish? So far, the return of the Jews is partial, pending the work of Elijah. Ezekiel 37, I will take Israel and Judah and I will make them one nation in the land. That work is still future. Romans 11 and New Testament, judgment will come upon the tents of Judah first. That's the Jews in the land. But then, Romans 11, will all Israel be saved. So there is a message, perhaps of hope, that there is still a future role for Tarshish. Psalm 72, the most, I don't know about America, but in England it's the most quoted or used verse, chapter, on a Sunday night to introduce a lecture, isn't it? And the speaker never deals with that verse, dealing with Tarshish. The time will come when Jesus will have dominion for sea to sea, and therefore Tarshish must still be in existence. The Tarshish of the Isles will bring presents. Isaiah 60, arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is written upon thee. And the AV says the forces, look at the margin, the wealth, gold, silver, and so on, shall come unto thee. Surely the isles shall wait for me. God has still got a purpose for Tarshish. And they will bring my sons. Which sons? Well, those who've not been brought already will, under the work of Elijah and the saints, I believe, brothers and sisters, have yet to be brought back. And so then we have not, of course, referred to Isaiah 18, how the island nations, shadowing Israel with their wings in the west and the east, will protect Israel in the time to come. The kings of Tarshish shall bring presents. The ships of Tarshish shall bring thy sons from far, the work of regathering Israel from far. And then will the wealth of the Gentiles come unto thee. And that brings us back, brothers and sisters, to where we started. The time and the reference to when the Lord will gather his people from all nations, something we have yet to see. And those are the words we sing in that closing hymn, isn't it? Then, and then. It's a wonderful hymn, by the way, because it spells out the sequence of events, doesn't it? Then shall Israel be saved. Long dispersed, mourning, seek the Lord their God. Then will they look on him whom once they pierced, own and kiss the chastening rod. Then, and only then, shall Israel be saved. And when Israel are saved, war and tumult then shall cease, while the greater Son of David rules a conquered world in peace. May that come soon.